The autumn wind cut through the broken windshield like a blade, carrying with it the scent of pine and approaching snow. Elena Martinez pressed her foot harder against the gas pedal, but the ancient pickup truck wheezed and shuddered, black smoke billowing from beneath its dented hood. In the rearview mirror, she could see her 3-year-old triplets huddled together in the back seat, their identical dark eyes wide with uncertainty. Between them sat Esperanza, a peculiar red hen with feathers that seemed to shimmer with an otherworldly gleam, completely unbothered by the chaos surrounding her. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The truck gave one final, mechanical death rattle before coasting to a stop on the shoulder of a dirt road that stretched endlessly through the Colorado wilderness. Elena's hands trembled as she gripped the steering wheel, fighting back tears that threatened to spill over. $300 to her name, no phone signal for the past 50 miles, and winter approaching faster than she could outrun her past. "Mama, why did we stop?" Sofia whispered from the back seat, her small voice barely audible over the wind whistling through the broken glass. "The truck needs to rest, Mia," Elena managed, forcing a smile she didn't feel. Her twins, Carlos and Diego, pressed closer to their sister, all three of them instinctively seeking comfort in each other's presence. They had learned early in their short lives that sometimes the world was an uncertain place, but they always had each other. Elena stepped out of the truck, her worn boots crunching on gravel as she surveyed their surroundings. Rolling hills stretched in every direction, painted in autumn's final brushstrokes of gold and crimson. In the distance, she could make out a cluster of buildings nestled in a valley, smoke rising from what appeared to be a chimney. Civilization, or at least the hope of it. Behind her, Esperanza let out a soft cluck and somehow managed to open the truck door with her beak, hopping down onto the ground with surprising grace. The hen had been Elena's grandmother's most prized possession, passed down through generations of women who swore the bird was touched by something beyond the ordinary world. Elena had always dismissed such talk as folklore, until the morning she found the first golden egg nestled in Esperanza's favorite nesting box. Real gold, as impossible as it seemed. Enough to buy groceries for a month when her ex-husband Miguel stopped sending support payments. Enough to keep the lights on when his new wife convinced him that his previous family was a burden he no longer needed to carry. But even magical eggs couldn't stretch far enough when you were trying to disappear completely. The children climbed out of the truck, staying close to Elena's legs as they took in the vast emptiness around them. Carlos, always the most serious of the three, tugged at her jacket. "Are we lost, Mama?" Elena knelt down to his level, smoothing his dark hair with her fingers. "We're not lost, am I, amor? We're just taking a different path to our new home." It wasn't entirely a lie. For weeks, she had been driving west, following highways and back roads with no particular destination in mind except away. Away from Miguel's escalating threats. Away from his family's money and connections that made fighting for her children feel impossible. Away from the life that had slowly suffocated her dreams, until she could barely remember who she had been before becoming Mrs. Miguel Vega. The wind picked up, and Elena pulled her thin sweater tighter around her shoulders. The children would need warmth and food soon, and standing on this deserted road wouldn't provide either. She gathered their few belongings from the truck bed, hefting a duffel bag that contained everything they owned, plus the small wooden crate she had fashioned into a traveling coupe for Esperanza. "We're going to walk to those buildings," she announced, trying to inject confidence into her voice. "It'll be an adventure." Sofia clapped her hands together, always ready to find joy in any situation. "Like the pioneers, Mama?" "Exactly like the pioneers, baby." They began walking down the dusty road, Elena carrying the duffel bag and chicken crate, while the children stayed close beside her. Esperanza seemed content in her makeshift home, occasionally peering out through the wooden slats with bright, intelligent eyes that held secrets Elena was only beginning to understand. The buildings grew larger as they approached, revealing themselves to be part of a working ranch. A sprawling farmhouse dominated the scene, its wraparound porch welcoming despite the peeling paint and weathered wood. Several barns and outbuildings scattered across the property spoke of a place where real work happened, where people made their living from the land rather than from boardrooms and stock portfolios. As they walked up the long gravel driveway, Elena noticed the meticulous care that had gone into maintaining the property despite its rustic appearance. Fences were straight and sturdy, gates hung properly on their hinges, and the few animals visible in the pastures appeared healthy and well-tended. This was a place owned by someone who understood that true wealth came from honest labor and attention to detail. A black and tan German shepherd emerged from behind one of the barns, alerting to their presence with a sharp bark. The dog's ears were pricked forward, watchful but not aggressive, and Elena felt a small measure of relief. In her experience, dogs reflected their owners' temperaments, and this one seemed more curious than hostile. "Nice doggy," Sofia said, immediately wanting to approach the animal despite Elena's restraining hand on her shoulder. "Let's wait and see if anyone's home first," Elena murmured, though part of her wondered what she would do if no one was around. Night was approaching, and the temperature was dropping quickly. The front door of the farmhouse opened, and a man stepped onto the porch. Even from a distance, Elena could see he was tall and lean, with the kind of weathered appearance that came from years of outdoor work. He wore faded jeans, work boots, and a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing tanned forearms marked with the kind of scars that told stories of honest labor. The man walked toward them with an easy, unhurried gait, the German shepherd falling into step beside him. As he drew closer, Elena could make out more details. Sandy brown hair that looked like it had been cut by someone who cared more about practicality than style, green eyes that seemed to take in everything at once, and a face that spoke of someone who had lived through both hardship and contentment. "Afternoon," he said when he was close enough for normal conversation. His voice carried a slight Western drawl, warm and unhurried. "Looks like you folks might be having some trouble." Elena lifted her chin, trying to project a confidence she didn't feel. "Our truck broke down about a mile back. I was hoping there might be someone around who could help us get to town." The man's gaze moved from Elena to the children, then to the chicken crate, and finally back to her face. She saw no judgment there, no suspicion, just the quiet assessment of someone who had learned to read people quickly and accurately. "Name's Jake Morrison," he said, extending a calloused hand. "This is my place, the Copper Creek Ranch." "Elena Martinez," she replied, accepting his handshake. His grip was firm, but gentle. The kind of hands that knew how to be strong without causing harm. "These are my children, Sofia, Carlos, and Diego." Jake crouched down to the children's level, bringing himself eye to eye with them. "That's a fine-looking chicken you've got there," he said seriously, as if discussing livestock with 3-year-olds was the most natural thing in the world. "Her name is Esperanza," Carlos offered, his usual shyness temporarily overcome by the man's genuine interest. "That's a beautiful name. Does she lay good eggs?" The children exchanged glances, a silent communication that Elena recognized as their way of deciding how much to reveal. Finally, Sofia nodded enthusiastically. "The best eggs in the whole world." Jake smiled, and Elena noticed how the expression transformed his entire face, erasing years and revealing someone who understood the importance of taking children seriously. "Well, then she must be pretty special." He stood, addressing Elena again. "Town's about 15 miles from here, and it's getting late. Mechanic won't be able to look at your truck until morning anyway." He paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully. "You're welcome to stay the night. Got a guest room that's not being used, and I was just about to start dinner." Elena's first instinct was to decline. She had learned not to trust unexpected kindness, especially from men who seemed too good to be true. But the children were tired and hungry, and the temperature was dropping fast. Sometimes survival meant accepting help, even when every instinct screamed caution. "I can pay you," she said quickly. "Not much, but something." Jake waved away her offer. "No need for that. Can't have folks stranded on the road when winter's coming on." He gestured toward the house. "Come on up to the porch. We can figure out the details inside where it's warm." As they walked toward the farmhouse, Elena noticed how the children seemed to relax in Jake's presence. Diego, usually the most cautious of the triplets, was chattering about the different animals he could see around the ranch. Carlos was asking questions about the German shepherd, whose name turned out to be Rex, and Sofia was humming quietly to herself, a sure sign that she felt safe. The inside of the farmhouse was exactly what Elena had expected from the outside. Clean, but lived in, furnished with pieces that prioritized comfort over style. A stone fireplace dominated one wall of the main room, flanked by built-in bookshelves that held a mixture of ranch management guides, classic novels, and what appeared to be several photo albums. The kitchen was visible through an open doorway, large enough to feed a family but clearly designed for practical use rather than entertaining. "Why don't you all have a seat?" Jake suggested, indicating a comfortable-looking sofa covered in soft brown leather. "I'll get some coffee started, maybe find some milk and cookies for the kids." Elena settled onto the sofa with the children pressed against her sides, still clutching Esperanza's crate. The hen seemed remarkably calm given the day's upheaval, occasionally making soft clucking sounds that the children found comforting. Jake moved around the kitchen with the efficient movements of someone accustomed to cooking for himself. Elena watched through the doorway as he filled a coffee pot, gathered mugs, and rummaged through cabinets for appropriate snacks for children. There was something peaceful about his unhurried competence, a stark contrast to Miguel's constant urgency and need to control every situation. "How long have you had the ranch?" Elena asked, partly to fill the silence and partly because she was genuinely curious about this man who had offered shelter to complete strangers. "Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us." Now back to the story. "About 8 years now," Jake replied, returning with a tray that held steaming mugs and a plate of store-bought cookies that he seemed slightly embarrassed about. "Inherited it from my uncle. Took me a while to figure out what I was doing, but we're getting by now." He handed Elena a mug of coffee that smelled like heaven after the day she'd had, then offered the cookies to the children. They looked to their mother for permission before each taking one, their careful manners evidence of Elena's consistent efforts to raise them properly despite their chaotic circumstances. "What kind of ranch is it?" Elena asked, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. "Cattle mostly. Some horses. We run about 200 head on 3,000 acres. Jake settled into a well-worn armchair across from the sofa. "Not the biggest operation around, but it keeps me busy." "Do you manage it all yourself?" "Mostly. Got a couple of hands who help during busy seasons, but day-to-day it's just me and Rex here." The dog, hearing his name, lifted his head from where he'd been lying near the fireplace. Elena found herself studying Jake's face as he talked, looking for signs of the deception she'd learned to watch for in Miguel. But his expression seemed genuine, his answers straightforward without the calculated charm she'd grown to mistrust. When he spoke about the ranch, she could hear real pride and affection in his voice, the contentment of someone who had found their place in the world. "Mama, can Esperanza come out of her box?" Sofia asked, interrupting Elena's observations. Elena looked questioningly at Jake, who nodded. "Long as she doesn't mind sharing space with Rex. He's good with other animals." Elena carefully opened the crate, and Esperanza emerged with dignified composure, shaking her feathers and taking in her new surroundings with bright, alert eyes. The hen seemed to approve of what she saw, making a soft sound that might have been contentment before settling onto the rug near the fireplace. Rex lifted his head to observe the newcomer, his tail wagging slowly in what appeared to be a friendly greeting. Esperanza regarded him with the kind of regal tolerance that chickens seem to perfect, neither encouraging nor discouraging his interest. "She's beautiful," Jake observed, and Elena could tell he meant it. "Don't think I've ever seen feathers quite that color before." Elena looked at Esperanza, seeing her as Jake might, a striking bird with unusual coloring and an almost supernatural calm. To someone who didn't know the hen's secret, she would simply appear to be an exceptionally fine example of her breed. "She was my grandmother's," Elena said carefully. "Very special bloodline." It wasn't exactly a lie, though it didn't begin to capture the truth of what made Esperanza extraordinary. Elena had been raised on her grandmother's stories about the magical properties of certain animals, tales she'd dismissed as folklore until she'd inherited both the hen and the responsibility of caring for her unique gift. Jake nodded, apparently accepting the explanation without needing further details. "Family animals are always the best. Got more personality than the commercial breeds." As if to prove his point, Esperanza stood and walked over to where Carlos sat on the floor, allowing him to gently stroke her feathers. The sight of her son's small hand moving carefully over the hen's back brought unexpected tears to Elena's eyes. The children had been through so much in recent months. The escalating arguments between their parents, the sudden departure from their home, weeks of uncertainty as Elena tried to figure out how to build a new life for them. But here they were, adapting once again with the resilience that children possessed in abundance, finding comfort in a stranger's kindness and a warm room after a day of fear and uncertainty. "You all right?" Jake asked quietly, noticing her emotional state. Elena wiped her eyes quickly, embarrassed by her display of vulnerability. "It's been a long day. A long few months, actually." Jake didn't press for details, for which Elena was grateful. Instead, he stood and moved toward the kitchen again. "Let me get dinner started. Nothing fancy, but it'll be filling." "I could help," Elena offered, following him. "I'm actually a pretty good cook. I won't say no to that. Been eating my own cooking for too long." Jake opened the refrigerator, revealing well-organized shelves stocked with the basics. "Got some chicken in here. Vegetables from the garden. We could probably put together something decent." Elena felt herself relaxing as she moved around the kitchen beside Jake, falling into the familiar rhythm of meal preparation. Cooking had always been one of her favorite activities, a creative outlet that provided both satisfaction and practical results. In the early days of her marriage, she'd enjoyed preparing elaborate meals for Miguel's business associates, taking pride in the compliments and the way her efforts contributed to his success. That had changed gradually as Miguel's control over their lives intensified. Her cooking became another area where nothing was ever quite good enough, where criticism replaced appreciation, where her own preferences and creativity were steadily eroded in favor of what he deemed appropriate for a wife in his position. But here, in Jake's kitchen, she remembered what it felt like to cook simply for the pleasure of feeding people well. Jake proved to be an easy partner, anticipating what she needed and staying out of her way while remaining available to help. They worked together with the kind of comfortable coordination that usually developed over time, as if they'd been preparing meals together for years rather than hours. The children played quietly in the main room, visible through the kitchen doorway, entertaining themselves with some wooden toys Jake had produced from a cabinet. Esperanza had settled near them, apparently content to serve as a feathered pillow for whichever child needed one. "They're good kids," Jake observed, seasoning vegetables while Elena prepared the chicken. "Well behaved." "They've had to grow up faster than they should have," Elena admitted. "But yes, they're wonderful children. Triplets must be a handful. 3 times the work, 3 times the worry, 3 times the love." Elena smiled, the expression feeling natural for the first time in weeks. "I wouldn't change it, though. They keep each other company in a way that single children can't understand." Jake nodded thoughtfully. "Must be nice, having that kind of built-in friendship." Something in his tone made Elena glance at him more closely. "Do you have siblings?" "Had a brother. Lost him in Afghanistan about 5 years ago." The simple statement carried weight that Elena recognized. She'd learned to hear the difference between grief that had been processed and pain that remained raw, and Jake's words held the particular heaviness of loss that had been accepted but never forgotten. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "Thanks. He was my best friend growing up. Always figured we'd run this place together eventually." Jake continued working with his hands while he talked, the motion seeming to help him navigate the emotional territory. "Took me a while to figure out how to do it alone." Elena understood something then about the man who had offered them shelter. The careful maintenance of the ranch, the well-organized home, the comfortable solitude. These were the adaptations of someone who had learned to find contentment in his own company while carrying the weight of plans that would never come to fruition. "Is that why you inherited the ranch instead of him?" "He was career military. Uncle knew I was the one who'd actually stick around and work the land." Jake moved to check on the chicken Elena had put in the oven. "Tom always said he'd come back eventually, but I think we both knew he'd found his calling in the service." They continued cooking in companionable silence, the kitchen filling with aromas that made the children lift their heads hopefully from their play. Elena found herself watching Jake's hands as he worked, capable hands that spoke of someone who had learned to do necessary tasks well rather than seeking shortcuts or delegating to others. When dinner was ready, they gathered around Jake's kitchen table, the children climbing onto chairs with the kind of excited anticipation that came from being genuinely hungry. Jake served everyone with the careful attention of someone unaccustomed to hosting, but determined to do it properly. The meal was simple but satisfying, exactly the kind of comfort food that the day had demanded. Elena watched her children eat with the focused intensity of young animals, their usual chatter subdued by exhaustion and the presence of their host. "This is really good," Jake said after the first few bites, and Elena could tell he meant it. "Been a long time since I've had a home-cooked meal that didn't come from my own limited repertoire. Thank you for sharing your kitchen. And your home." Elena met his eyes across the table. "You didn't have to help us." "Sure I did," Jake replied without hesitation. "Couldn't leave folks stranded, especially not with kids." It was such a simple statement of principle, delivered without any sense of self-congratulation or expectation of gratitude. Elena realized this was probably how Jake approached most situations, seeing what needed to be done and doing it without complicated calculations about cost or benefit. After dinner, Jake showed them to the guest room, a comfortable space with a double bed and a small cot that he produced from a closet. The room was clean and simply furnished, with windows that looked out over the darkening landscape and curtains that would provide privacy and warmth when drawn. "Bathroom's just down the hall," Jake explained. "Cleaned towels in the closet there. Help yourselves to anything you need." Elena settled the children for the night, grateful for the routine of bedtime stories and whispered conversations that helped them process the day's experiences. They were full of questions about the ranch, about Jake, about how long they might stay, and Elena found herself giving non-committal answers, because she honestly didn't know what would happen next. What she did know was that for the first time in months, they were in a place that felt safe, the kind of safety that came not from locked doors and security systems, but from being welcomed by someone whose basic decency was evident in both word and action. When the children were finally asleep, curled together in the larger bed with Esperanza roosting contentedly on the footrail, Elena made her way back to the main room. Jake was sitting by the fireplace, reading what appeared to be a ranch management magazine. Rex sprawled at his feet. "They settled down all right?" he asked, looking up from his reading. "They're exhausted." Today was harder on them than they let on. Elena settled into the chair across from him, accepting the cup of tea he offered from a pot on the side table. "Kids are resilient," Jake observed, "but they pick up on more than adults realize." Elena studied his face in the firelight, wondering what experiences had taught him that particular truth. "You speak like someone who remembers being a child in difficult circumstances." Jake set down his magazine, considering her words. "My dad left when I was about their age. Mom did her best, but it wasn't easy. Uncle Pete stepped in where he could, which is part of why he left me this place. That must have been hard. Made me appreciate stability when I found it." Jake gestured around the room. "This place has been my anchor for years now. Can't imagine being anywhere else." Elena sipped her tea, thinking about stability and anchors and the way some people seem to find their place in the world while others spent years searching. She'd thought she'd found hers in marriage to Miguel, in the beautiful home they'd shared, in the life they'd built together. It had taken too long to recognize that what she'd mistaken for stability was actually a cage, beautiful and well-appointed, but confining nonetheless. "What about you?" Jake asked. "Where were you headed when your truck broke down?" Elena considered how much to reveal, weighing honesty against the instinct for self-protection that had kept her and the children safe for weeks on the road. "Anywhere that wasn't where we came from," she said finally. "Sometimes you have to leave everything behind to find out who you really are." Jake nodded, apparently understanding more from her careful words than she'd actually said. "Running from something or towards something?" "Both, I think." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the fire crackling softly and Rex's gentle snoring providing a peaceful soundtrack. Elena felt some of the tension she'd been carrying for weeks beginning to ease, her shoulders dropping away from her ears for the first time in recent memory. "Jake," she said suddenly, surprising herself with a question she hadn't planned to ask. "Why did you really invite us to stay?" "You don't know anything about us." Jake was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the fire. When he spoke, his words were measured and thoughtful. "Used to be a family, lived about 10 miles from here. Husband was difficult. Wife would show up in town sometimes with bruises she said came from falling or walking into doors." He paused, his jaw tightening slightly. Everyone knew what was really happening, but she never asked for help, so nobody knew how to offer it. Elena's breath caught in her throat, recognizing herself in the story. One winter night, she showed up at my door with her 2 kids. Husband had been drinking, things got bad. She was bleeding from a cut on her forehead. Kids were terrified. Jake's voice remained steady, but Elena could hear the old anger beneath his words. I let them stay the night, helped her get to a women's shelter the next day. What happened to them? Last I heard, she'd moved to her sister's place in California. Kids were doing well in school, she'd found work she enjoyed. Jake met Elena's eyes directly. Point is, sometimes people need a safe place to land, even if it's just for one night. No questions asked. Elena felt tears threatening again, overwhelmed by the kindness of this stranger who had recognized her situation without forcing her to explain it. You think I'm running from an abusive husband. I think you're a mother protecting her children, and the reason doesn't matter as much as the fact that you're safe tonight. The simple acceptance in his words broke through Elena's careful composure, and she found herself crying for the first time since leaving Miguel. Not the silent tears she'd shed while driving through endless miles of highway, but real sobs that carried months of fear and uncertainty and desperate hope. Jake didn't try to comfort her with words or platitudes. Instead, he simply handed her a box of tissues and waited patiently while she released emotions she'd been holding back for too long. When her tears finally subsided, he refilled her teacup and settled back in his chair as if emotional breakdowns in his living room were perfectly normal occurrences. Feel better? He asked gently. Elena nodded, wiping her eyes. I'm sorry, I don't usually fall apart like that. Nothing to apologize for. Sometimes a person needs to let things out before they can move forward. Elena looked at this man who had offered shelter without expecting explanations, who had fed her children and treated them with genuine kindness, who had somehow understood exactly what she needed without making her ask for it. How do you do it? She asked. Live alone out here? Take care of all this by yourself? Jake considered the question seriously. Keeps me busy. Always something that needs doing on a ranch. And it's peaceful, mostly. Good place to think. Don't you get lonely? Sometimes, he admitted. But lonely's better than being around the wrong people. Elena understood that sentiment completely. She'd been lonelier in her marriage than she'd ever been by herself, surrounded by Miguel's expectations and demands, while feeling increasingly isolated from her own thoughts and feelings. Your husband, Jake said carefully, he gonna come looking for you? Elena's stomach clenched at the question she'd been trying not to think about. Probably. He has resources, connections, and he doesn't like to lose things he considers his. You and the kids aren't things, Jake said firmly. Try telling him that. Jake was quiet for a moment, and Elena could almost see him processing this information, considering its implications. How long since you left? 3 weeks. We've been driving mostly, staying in cheap motels, moving every few days. Elena pulled her sweater tighter around herself. I had some money saved, but it's running low. And the plan was just to keep driving until you found somewhere that felt right? Elena laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. I didn't really have a plan beyond getting away, kind of making it up as I go along. Jake nodded thoughtfully. Well, you're welcome to stay here while you figure out the next step. Got plenty of room, and the kids seemed to like it. Elena stared at him, certain she'd misunderstood. I can't ask you to do that. You don't know us, don't know what kind of trouble we might bring. Not asking you to ask. I'm offering. Jake's voice was steady, matter-of-fact. Place gets lonely sometimes anyway. Might be nice to have some company. I couldn't pay you much, Elena said, her mind racing with possibilities and fears in equal measure. Wouldn't expect you to. Ranch always needs extra hands, and someone who can cook like you could earn their keep easy enough. Elena felt that dangerous flutter of hope again, the treacherous emotion that had led her into trouble before. But this felt different somehow, less like rescue and more like opportunity. The children, she began. School bus runs right past the front gate. Driver's been taking kids from this ranch for 20 years. Jake had answers for every concern she raised, but Elena could see he wasn't pushing, just offering information and letting her process it at her own pace. It was such a contrast to Miguel's way of bulldozing through her objections until she gave in out of exhaustion rather than conviction. "Why?" she asked again. "Why would you do this for complete strangers?" Jake was quiet for a long time, staring into the fire as if the flames held answers to questions he'd been carrying for years. "My Uncle Pete used to say that a ranch is only as good as the people who work it," he said finally. He meant that land needs more than one person to really thrive. Needs different perspectives, different skills, different kinds of caring. He paused, then continued more quietly. "Been running this place alone for 5 years now, telling myself it was enough. But watching your kids play with Rex today, seeing how they lit up when they saw the animals, made me remember what this place used to feel like when there was a family here." Elena felt her heart constrict with an emotion she couldn't quite name. Not gratitude exactly, though that was part of it. Something deeper and more complex, recognition perhaps of meeting someone whose loneliness matched her own in unexpected ways. "It would just be temporary," she said, testing the words. "Until I figure out what comes next." "Long as you need," Jake replied. "No pressure either way. If you decide to move on tomorrow, I'll help you get wherever you're going." Elena looked around the warm, comfortable room, thinking about her children asleep down the hall in clean beds, Esperanza roosting peacefully nearby. For the first time in weeks, they weren't moving, weren't running, weren't looking over their shoulders for signs of pursuit. "Okay," she said quietly, the words slipping out before she could second-guess herself. "Okay, we'll stay. For a while." Jake smiled, the expression transforming his entire face. "Good. Rex will be happy to have some kids around to spoil." As if hearing his name, the German shepherd lifted his head and thumped his tail against the floor, apparently approving of the arrangement. Elena finished her tea and said goodnight, making her way back to the guest room where her children slept peacefully. She stood in the doorway for a long time, watching their faces in the dim light from the hallway, thinking about the strange turns that had brought them to this place. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions, new uncertainties. Miguel was still out there somewhere, probably tracking their credit card usage and cell phone signals, determined to drag them back into the life she'd fought so hard to escape. The truck would need expensive repairs they couldn't afford, and she'd have to figure out how to build some kind of future from the scattered pieces of their old life. But tonight, for the first time in months, Elena fell asleep without fear, listening to the peaceful sounds of her children breathing and Esperanza's soft clucking from her perch at the foot of the bed. Outside, the wind moved through pine trees with a sound like distant music, and somewhere in the darkness, Jake Morrison was probably checking on his animals one last time before sleep, making sure everything under his care was safe and settled for the night. In the morning, Elena would discover that Esperanza had laid an egg overnight, golden and perfect in the makeshift nest Jake had provided. She would have to decide how much to tell him about the hen's extraordinary gift and how much to keep secret until she better understood the man who had offered them sanctuary. But those were tomorrow's concerns. Tonight, she was simply a mother whose children were safe, warm, and sleeping peacefully under a stranger's roof, protected by kindness that asked for nothing in return except the chance to help. The morning sun streamed through the farmhouse windows, painting golden rectangles across the hardwood floors as Elena stirred awake to the sound of her children's excited whispers. For a moment, disorientation clouded her thoughts until memory returned. They were safe, warm, and welcome in Jake Morrison's home on Copper Creek Ranch. Sofia's face appeared beside the bed, eyes bright with discovery. "Mama, Esperanza made something beautiful." Elena sat up quickly, her heart racing with familiar anxiety. In their makeshift nest at the foot of the bed, Esperanza sat proudly beside a gleaming golden egg, her red feathers seeming to shimmer with satisfaction in the morning light. "Did you show anyone else?" Elena asked urgently, pulling Sofia close. "No, Mama. Carlos wanted to, but I remembered what Abuela used to say about keeping special things safe." Elena's grandmother had indeed taught the children about discretion, though she'd couched the lessons in stories and games rather than warnings about the very real dangers of possessing something impossible. Relief flooded through Elena as she carefully lifted the warm egg, feeling its substantial weight in her palm. Diego and Carlos crowded closer, their faces filled with the wonder that never quite faded despite having witnessed this miracle dozens of times over the past months. To them, Esperanza's gift was simply part of their family's story, as natural as their mother's cooking or their father's absence. "Can we show Mr. Jake?" Carlos asked, reaching out to stroke Esperanza's neck with gentle fingers. "Not yet, Mijo. We need to be very careful about who knows Esperanza's secret." Elena tucked the egg carefully into the small jewelry box where she kept their most precious items: her grandmother's rosary, the children's birth certificates, and the 3 other golden eggs that had funded their escape from Miguel's world of surveillance and control. The sound of Jake's voice drifted through the house, accompanied by Rex's excited barking and the clatter of breakfast preparations. Elena quickly dressed the children in their cleanest clothes, running her fingers through their dark hair and wishing she had more to offer this man who had opened his home to strangers. When they emerged from the guest room, Jake was standing at the kitchen stove, wielding a spatula with the determined concentration of someone whose cooking skills were adequate but uninspired. He looked up as they entered, his face lighting with genuine pleasure at their appearance. "Morning, everyone. Hope you slept well." "Better than we have in weeks," Elena admitted, moving toward the coffee pot that sat like an answered prayer on the counter. Jake had clearly made an effort to provide breakfast suitable for children: scrambled eggs, toast cut into triangles, and sliced apples arranged on plates decorated with cheerful roosters. The gesture touched Elena more than any expensive gift Miguel had ever bestowed upon her. As they settled around the kitchen table, Elena watched Jake interact with her children, noting how he spoke to them as individuals rather than interchangeable units. He asked Carlos about his interest in the ranch horses, complimented Sofia on her careful table manners, and listened seriously as Diego explained his theory about why Rex was the smartest dog in the world. "So what's the plan for today?" Jake asked as he refilled Elena's coffee cup. "I should probably call about getting the truck towed, see what the damage is." Elena's stomach clenched at the thought of repair bills she couldn't afford. "Already took care of that. Called Tommy Rodriguez first thing this morning. He runs the garage in town. He'll have a look at it this afternoon, give us an estimate." Elena stared at him, uncertain whether to feel grateful or overwhelmed by his assumption of responsibility for her problems. "You didn't need to do that." Seemed like the practical thing to do. Jake's tone was matter-of-fact, devoid of any expectation of gratitude or acknowledgement of his generosity. "Tommy's honest, fair prices. If it's something major, at least we'll know what we're dealing with." The casual use of "we" sent an unexpected flutter through Elena's chest. It had been so long since anyone had partnered with her in solving problems rather than creating them. After breakfast, Jake offered to show the children around the ranch while Elena took some time to think and perhaps call her sister Rosa in California. The children accepted this plan with enthusiasm, already drawn to Jake's calm presence and the promise of seeing real farm animals up close. Elena found herself alone in the house for the first time in weeks, surrounded by the comfortable quiet of a well-lived-in home. She wandered through the main rooms, taking in details she'd missed the night before: family photographs on the mantelpiece, books whose worn spines suggested frequent reading, the subtle signs of a man who had learned to create comfort for himself without anyone else's input or approval. From the kitchen window, she could see Jake leading her children toward a large paddock where several horses grazed peacefully. The children stayed close to him, their small hands occasionally reaching for his larger ones when uncertainty overcame excitement. Rex trotted alongside the group, clearly accepting his role as guardian and guide. Elena pulled out her phone, noting the strong signal that had been absent for most of their journey west. Rosa answered on the second ring, her voice tight with worry that had been building for days. "Elena, thank God! I've been going crazy not hearing from you. Where are you?" "Colorado. A place called Copper Creek Ranch." Elena sank into Jake's comfortable armchair, suddenly exhausted by the weight of decisions she still needed to make. "Colorado? That's hundreds of miles from where you said you might be headed." Rosa's relief was evident, even through the phone connection. "Are you safe? Are the kids okay?" "We're fine. Better than fine, actually." Elena found herself describing their unexpected sanctuary, Jake's kindness, the children's obvious happiness in their new surroundings. "Elena," Rosa said carefully when she finished, "this man you're describing, you barely know him. Don't you think it's dangerous to trust a stranger this completely? The question echoed Elena's own fears, the voice of caution that had kept her awake much of the night despite her exhaustion. I know how it sounds, but Rosa, you should see how he is with the children. There's nothing fake about his kindness. Miguel was kind at first, too, Rosa reminded her gently. Elena was quiet for a moment, remembering those early days when Miguel's attention had felt like salvation rather than suffocation. But even then, his kindness had come with expectations, with subtle requirements for gratitude and compliance that had grown more demanding over time. This is different, she said finally. Jake doesn't want anything from us except maybe some company. He's not trying to fix us or save us or change us into something else. Rosa sighed. And Elena could picture her sister sitting in her sunny California kitchen, weighing concern against trust in Elena's judgment. What about Miguel? Has he tried to contact you? Not directly, but you know he has ways of finding people when he wants to. Elena glanced toward the window where her children were now inside the paddock, carefully petting a gentle mare under Jake's supervision. I keep expecting him to show up, demanding we come home. Maybe he's given up. Maybe he's realized the cost of chasing you isn't worth it. Elena wanted to believe that, but she knew Miguel too well. His pride wouldn't allow him to simply let them disappear, especially not with the divorce proceedings still pending and custody arrangements unresolved. He would see their flight as theft of his property rather than escape from an impossible situation. I need to figure out what to do next, Elena admitted. The truck needs repairs we can't afford, and I'm running out of money. Jake says we can stay here as long as we need to, but that's not a permanent solution. Why not? The question surprised Elena. Because we can't just impose on his generosity indefinitely. He has his own life, his own responsibilities. Elena, listen to yourself. You're describing a man who has space, resources, and apparently a genuine desire for your company. Maybe instead of looking for reasons why it can't work, you should consider whether it might be exactly what all of you need. Elena was quiet, watching through the window as Sofia climbed carefully onto the mare's back with Jake's steadying hand supporting her. The little girl's face glowed with joy that had been absent for months, replaced by the constant tension of living in uncertainty. I'm scared, Elena whispered. Of him? Of trusting again. Of believing that someone could want us around without expecting something in return. Rosa's voice softened with understanding. Not everyone is Miguel Hermana. Some people really are just good. After ending the call, Elena sat in Jake's living room, thinking about trust and fear and the complicated mathematics of starting over. Through the window, she could see that the children had moved on to exploring one of the barns, their excited voices carrying across the yard as they discovered new wonders. When Jake returned with the children an hour later, their faces were flushed with excitement and their clothes bore evidence of close encounters with friendly farm animals. They burst through the door like small tornadoes, full of stories about horses and cows and the barn cat who had allowed them to pet her kittens. Mama, did you know baby cows are called calves, and they drink milk from their mamas just like we used to? Sofia announced, climbing onto Elena's lap. And horses can live to be 30 years old, which is even older than you, Mama, Carlos added with the innocent honesty of childhood. Jake settled into his usual chair, Rex flopping down beside him with the satisfied exhaustion of a dog who had supervised children for hours. They're naturals, he said, smiling at Elena. Haven't seen kids take to ranch life that quickly in years. Elena felt that dangerous flutter of hope again, the treacherous whisper that suggested maybe, possibly, they had found more than just temporary shelter. Tommy called about the truck, Jake continued, his expression growing more serious. Engines blown, transmissions shot. He can fix it, but it's going to cost more than the truck's worth. Elena's heart sank, though she'd been expecting bad news. How much more? About $3,000. The number hit Elena like a physical blow. $3,000 might as well have been $3 million given her current financial situation. She had perhaps $200 left from their emergency fund, plus the golden eggs that she couldn't exactly march into a bank in exchange for cash. I see, she said quietly, her mind already racing through impossible calculations. Jake studied her face, clearly reading her distress. There might be another option. Elena looked up hopefully. Tommy's got a decent used truck on his lot. Nothing fancy, but reliable. He'd take your old truck as a trade-in and finance the difference. monthly payments instead of a lump sum. I don't have job references, credit history, any of the things he'd need for financing. Jake was quiet for a moment, then spoke carefully. I could co-sign. Vouch for your character. Help with payments if needed. Elena stared at him, overwhelmed by the casual generosity of his offer. Jake, you barely know me. What if I just disappear one day and leave you responsible for the debt? Then I guess I'd have learned something about trusting the wrong person. His green eyes held steady on hers, but I don't think that's going to happen. The simple faith in his words undid something in Elena's chest, some tightly held fear about her own worthiness of trust and kindness. Why would you do that? Jake glanced toward the children, who were now playing quietly with Rex near the fireplace, building what appeared to be a fort out of sofa cushions. Been thinking about what you said last night, about not having a plan beyond getting away. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Sometimes the best plans aren't the ones you make ahead of time. Sometimes they're the ones that find you when you need them most. Elena felt tears threatening again, overwhelmed by the implications of what he was offering. Not just help with a truck, but a chance to stay, to build something stable for her children in this place that had welcomed them without question. The ranch work you mentioned, she said carefully. What would that involve? Jake's face brightened slightly, as if her question represented some form of acceptance. Depends on your interests and abilities. There's always cooking, of course, feeding the hands during busy seasons, preparing meals for ranch events. But there's also bookkeeping, supply ordering, maintenance work, animal care. I used to manage Miguel's household staff, coordinate his business entertaining. I know more about organization and planning than I probably realized. Those are exactly the kinds of skills a ranch needs. Place this size generates a lot of paperwork, scheduling coordination between different activities. Elena found herself imagining what it might look like to channel her organizational abilities into something productive rather than decorative, to use her skills in service of something real and growing rather than Miguel's image management. What about the children? Schooling, healthcare, all the practical things they need? School bus stops right at the gate, like I mentioned. Elementary school in town is small but good. Teachers know all the kids by name. Parents are involved. For healthcare, there's a clinic in town and a hospital about 30 minutes away. Jake seemed to have considered every practical concern, as if he'd been thinking through the logistics of their staying long before she'd accepted the possibility. And you'd be comfortable with 3 small children disrupting your quiet bachelor existence? Jake laughed, the sound warm and genuine. Elena, I've been rattling around this house alone for 5 years. A little disruption might be exactly what this place needs. That evening, after the children were bathed and settled with bedtime stories, Elena found herself in Jake's kitchen again, this time preparing dinner with ingredients from his well-stocked pantry. The domesticity of the scene struck her. She and Jake moving around each other with increasing comfort, the children's voices drifting from the living room where they played with Rex, Esperanza roosting contentedly in her temporary corner. "Can I ask you something?" Elena said as she seasoned vegetables for roasting. "Sure. Why haven't you married? Had a family of your own?" Jake was quiet for a moment, considering her question as he prepared a simple salad. "Came close once. Girl I knew in college, city type, who thought ranch life sounded romantic until she actually experienced it. What happened? She realized she wanted the idea of a ranch more than the reality. Too isolated, too much work, too far from shopping and restaurants and the kind of social life she was used to." Jake shrugged, but Elena could hear old disappointment in his voice. Can't blame her, really. This life isn't for everyone. Elena thought about her own journey from city comfort to this remote sanctuary, how the isolation that might have once frightened her now felt like protection. What about since then? Few relationships here and there, but nothing serious. Started to think maybe I was just meant to be alone, focus on the ranch. Jake glanced toward the living room where the children's laughter provided a soundtrack to their conversation. Then yesterday happened, and I realized maybe I wasn't as content with solitude as I thought. Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks at the implication of his words. "Jake, I'm not trying to rush anything," he said quickly, not expecting anything beyond friendship and partnership in keeping this place running. But I'd be lying if I said having you all here didn't feel like something I'd been missing without knowing it. Elena stopped chopping vegetables, overwhelmed by the honesty of his admission. It's too soon for me to think about anything romantic. The divorce isn't even final, and the children have been through so much upheaval. I know. I'm not asking for promises or commitments, just the chance to see where this goes naturally. The word naturally resonated with Elena in a way that Miguel's calculated courtship never had. This felt organic, unforced, growing from genuine compatibility rather than strategic planning. The children adore you already, she admitted. The feeling's mutual. Haven't seen kids that curious and eager to learn in years. Elena resumed her food preparation, thinking about the way her children had blossomed in just 24 hours of Jake's attention and the ranch's stimulation. They'd been good children in their previous life, but here they seemed to be becoming themselves in ways she hadn't realized were missing. There's something else you should know, she said, making a decision that surprised her with its spontaneity. Jake looked up from his salad preparation, waiting. Elena wiped her hands on a dish towel, then walked to the guest room, returning with the jewelry box that contained their most precious secrets. Jake watched curiously as she opened it, revealing the 4 golden eggs nestled in soft fabric. "This is why we could afford to run," she said simply. Jake stared at the eggs, his expression cycling through confusion, disbelief, and wonder. He reached out tentatively, then stopped, looking at Elena for permission. "Go ahead. They're real." Jake lifted one of the eggs, testing its weight, examining its surface in the kitchen light. "These are solid gold. Esperanza lays one every few weeks. Has been for about 6 months now." Jake set the egg carefully back in the box, his gaze moving from the golden treasure to Elena's face and back again. "That's impossible." "I know. I thought so too, until I had the first one appraised. 24-karat gold, worth about $1,200 each depending on current market prices." Jake sank into a kitchen chair, processing this information. The chicken that lays golden eggs. Like the fairy tale. My grandmother always said Esperanza's bloodline was touched by something beyond the ordinary world. I thought it was just family folklore until the eggs started appearing. "Does anyone else know?" "Just my sister Rosa, and she didn't believe me until I sent her pictures." Elena closed the jewelry box carefully. "This is why Miguel can never find us. If he discovered Esperanza's gift, he'd find a way to exploit it, probably turn it into some kind of business venture." Jake nodded slowly, understanding the implications without needing detailed explanations. "So the broken truck, running out of money, that was all theater?" "No, it was real. I can't exactly walk into a bank and cash in magical golden eggs without raising questions I can't answer. And I've been afraid to sell them through normal channels because it might create a trail Miguel could follow." Jake was quiet for several minutes, absorbing this revelation and its complications. Finally, he looked up at Elena with an expression of complete seriousness. "Well," he said, "I guess that settles it." "Settles what?" "You definitely can't leave now. Do you have any idea how jealous the other ranchers would be if they knew I had the only hen in Colorado that lays golden eggs?" Elena stared at him for a moment, then burst into laughter that was part relief, part disbelief, and part genuine amusement at his matter-of-fact acceptance of the impossible. "You believe me." Just like that. "Elena, yesterday a beautiful woman showed up at my door with triplets and a magical chicken, and somehow it all felt like the most natural thing in the world." Jake smiled at her, his expression holding warmth and wonder in equal measure. "At this point, I'm just grateful you trust me enough to share the secret." Elena felt something shift inside her chest, a loosening of fears she'd carried for so long they'd become part of her identity. For the first time since Esperanza's gift had manifested, she wasn't carrying the burden of the secret alone. "So what do we do now?" she asked. "Now we figure out how to keep you all safe, help you build the life you want, and maybe turn this ranch into the kind of place where magical chickens and triplets and single mothers can all thrive together." Jake reached across the table to take her hand, his calloused palm warm against her skin. "Stay, Elena, really stay. Not just until you figure out what comes next, but because this is what comes next." Elena looked into his green eyes, seeing honesty and hope, and the kind of steadfast reliability she'd stopped believing existed in men. Around them, the house hummed with the comfortable sounds of home. Children playing, a dog snoring, Esperanza clucking softly from her corner. "Okay," she said, the word feeling like a leap of faith and a homecoming simultaneously. "Yes. We'll stay." Outside, the Colorado wind moved through pine trees with a sound like whispered promises. And in her makeshift nest, Esperanza ruffled her remarkable feathers as if she, too, approved of this decision that would change all their lives forever. The evening stretched ahead of them, full of practical discussions about living arrangements and ranch responsibilities and the logistics of building a life together. But underneath those necessary conversations ran a deeper current of possibility, the recognition that sometimes the most important journeys were the ones that brought you home to places you'd never been before. As Elena squeezed Jake's hand in acceptance of his offer, she realized that for the first time in years she was choosing her future rather than simply escaping her past. The difference felt like magic, as transformative and impossible as golden eggs and second chances, and the kind of love that arrived unannounced and asked for nothing more than the opportunity to grow. 2 months of autumn at Copper Creek Ranch had transformed Elena's family in ways she could barely comprehend. The children's laughter now echoed across the property daily as they helped Jake with morning chores, their small hands becoming capable of tasks that would have seemed impossible in their former urban life. Sofia had appointed herself chief egg collector, though she maintained special reverence for Esperanza's weekly golden contributions. Carlos had mastered the art of feeding cattle, standing proudly beside Jake as they distributed hay with practiced efficiency. Diego had discovered an unexpected talent for communicating with the horses, his gentle touch soothing even the most skittish animals. Elena herself had found rhythms she'd forgotten existed. Her mornings began before dawn, preparing a hearty breakfast that fueled ranch work rather than impressing business associates. Her days were filled with genuine productivity, managing Jake's chaotic filing system, coordinating with suppliers, planning meals that nourished rather than performed. Her evenings were spent in comfortable companionship, sharing stories around the dinner table or reading to the children by firelight, while Jake reviewed ranch records and Esperanza roosted contentedly nearby. The romance between Elena and Jake had developed with the same organic patience that characterized everything else about their relationship. Stolen glances across the kitchen, hands brushing during shared tasks, quiet conversations on the porch after the children slept. Nothing rushed, nothing demanded, just a natural gravitational pull that grew stronger each day. But on this particular November morning, as Elena prepared breakfast and watched Jake teach the children how to properly saddle a horse, her peaceful world shattered with the ringing of the telephone. Jake answered with his usual casual greeting, but Elena watched his expression change, watched his shoulders stiffen, and his voice take on a guarded tone that she'd never heard before. "No, sir, there's nobody here by that name," Jake said carefully. "This is a working ranch, not a boarding house." Elena's blood turned to ice water in her veins. She knew, even before Jake met her eyes across the kitchen, even before he hung up the phone with deliberate calm. Miguel had found them. "Mama, why do you look scared?" Sofia asked, appearing in the kitchen doorway, with hay in her hair and dirt on her small boots. Elena forced her voice to remain steady. "Go find your brothers, mija. Tell them to come inside right now." Jake moved toward her as Sofia scampered away, his face grim with understanding. That was someone claiming to be from a credit reporting agency, asking about Elena Martinez and whether I'd co-signed any loans recently. "He knows we're here." Elena's voice came out as barely a whisper. "Miguel found us. Probably just fishing, seeing if he could get confirmation. But yeah, he knows the general area, at least." Elena's mind raced through possibilities, all of them ending in disaster. Miguel's lawyers, his connections, his endless resources from making her life impossible. The custody battle that would resume with renewed intensity now that he'd located them. The questions about how she'd been supporting herself, and the children that she couldn't answer without revealing Esperanza's secret. "We have to leave," she said, already moving toward the guest room to gather their few belongings. "Today. Right now." Jake caught her arm gently, stopping her flight. "Elena, wait. Think about this." "Think about what?" "He found us, Jake. Within hours, this place will be crawling with private investigators and lawyers and who knows what else. I won't let you get dragged into that nightmare." The children tumbled through the door, their faces bright with expectation of whatever new adventure their mother might have planned. Elena looked at them, dirty, happy, completely at home in this place that had given them everything she'd hoped to find, and felt her heart break all over again. "We're leaving?" Carlos asked, reading the tension in the room with the perceptiveness that children developed when their world was constantly shifting. "Just for a little while," Elena managed, though they both knew she was lying. Jake knelt down to the children's level, his voice calm and reassuring. "Why don't you three go play with Rex in the living room for a few minutes? Your mama and I need to talk about some grown-up things." When they were alone, Jake straightened and looked Elena directly in the eyes. "Running isn't going to solve this. He'll just find you again. And next time, you might not land somewhere safe. So what do you suggest? That I stay here and fight a custody battle against a man with unlimited resources? That I drag you into legal proceedings that could destroy your life along with mine?" Jake was quiet for a moment, and Elena could see him thinking through options with the same methodical approach he brought to ranch problems. "What if we don't give him anything to fight about?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if by the time his lawyers get here there's nothing irregular about your situation? What if you're not a runaway wife with no visible means of support, but a legally divorced woman with a job, a home, and a partner willing to stand beside her?" Elena stared at him, not quite understanding what he was proposing. Jake moved to the kitchen desk, pulling out a folder she'd seen him working with late at night. "I've been making some calls, doing some research. Your divorce decree came through last week. Rosa faxed me a copy after I asked her to check with your lawyer." Elena's knees nearly buckled. "It's final. It's final. You're legally free of Miguel Vega, and according to the decree, you have full physical custody of the children with visitation rights only if you consent. But he'll contest it, claim I kidnapped them by leaving the state. With what grounds? You had every right to relocate, and you've been providing them with stable housing, education, healthcare, everything the court cares about." Jake set the folder on the counter between them. "Elena, you're not the powerless woman who ran away 2 months ago. You're a ranch manager with documented income, a permanent address, and a support system." Elena opened the folder, finding employment contracts, tax documents, bank statements showing regular deposits from ranch management fees that Jake had been quietly setting aside in her name. "You did this without telling me?" "I did this because I could see how scared you were of being trapped again, of being dependent on someone else's generosity." Jake's voice was gentle but firm. "You needed to know you could stand on your own if you had to." Elena stared at the documents that represented independence she'd never thought possible. "Jake, this is too much. You're paying me more than the work is worth. I'm paying you exactly what someone with your skills and dedication deserves. And Elena, the ranch has never run better. You've increased our efficiency by 30%, negotiated better deals with suppliers, organized systems that save me hours every week." Before Elena could respond, the sound of car engines on the gravel driveway announced the arrival she'd been dreading. Through the kitchen window, she could see 2 black sedans pulling up to the house, official-looking men in expensive suits emerging into the Colorado morning. "It's them," she whispered. Jake moved to stand beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. "Remember, you're not the same person who left Minneapolis. You're Elena Martinez, ranch manager, full-time resident of Colorado, legal guardian of 3 thriving children." The knock on the door came precisely, professionally. Jake answered it with the same calm authority he brought to every situation, stepping onto the porch and closing the door behind him to keep the conversation away from the children. Elena pressed her ear to the door, listening to voices too low to understand but recognizing the cadence of legal threats and demands for compliance. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, Jake returned, followed by 2 men who surveyed the farmhouse interior with calculating eyes. "Elena Martinez." The taller man addressed her directly, his voice carrying the kind of smooth authority that Miguel had always found so impressive. "I'm David Chen, representing Miguel Vega regarding custody arrangements for his minor children." "Ex-husband," Elena corrected firmly. "And the custody arrangements are already established by court decree." "Mr. Vega has concerns about the children's current living situation," the second man interjected. "Questions about stability, appropriate supervision, educational opportunities." Elena felt Jake's hand rest lightly on her lower back, a quiet reminder of his support. "The children are enrolled in the local elementary school, where they're excelling academically and socially. They receive medical care through the town clinic and have been examined by a pediatrician who pronounced them healthy and well-adjusted. She moved to the desk, pulling out school reports, medical records, documentation of the life they'd built. They live in a stable home environment with consistent routines, outdoor activities, and educational opportunities that their urban school never provided. The lawyers exchanged glances, clearly surprised by her organized response to their implicit accusations. "And your employment situation?" Chen asked, making notes on a legal pad. "Ranch manager for Copper Creek Ranch. Full-time position with benefits, documented income, stable housing." Elena handed him copies of the employment contracts Jake had prepared. "I'm financially independent and fully capable of supporting my children. Mr. Vega is prepared to offer significantly better financial support if the children return to Minneapolis," the second lawyer offered. "Private schools, cultural opportunities, advantages that rural Colorado simply cannot provide. My children are happy here," Elena said firmly. "They're thriving in ways they never did in the city. This is their home now." Jake stepped forward, his presence adding weight to her words. "I can attest to the children's adjustment and well-being. They've integrated completely into ranch life and the local community." "And you are?" Chen's tone carried subtle challenge. "Jake Morrison, ranch owner, and Elena's." He paused, glancing at Elena with a question in his eyes. "Partner," Elena said clearly, understanding the implications of the word and accepting them completely. Chen made more notes, his expression suggesting this wasn't the scenario Miguel had prepared him for. "Mr. Vega will want to exercise his visitation rights." "Mr. Vega's visitation rights are contingent on my consent," Elena replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Given his pattern of attempting to manipulate custody arrangements and his failure to respect my legal right to relocate, I don't consent to unsupervised visitation at this time. He could petition the court. Let him." Elena straightened, feeling Jake's quiet strength beside her and remembering her own capabilities that had been buried under years of Miguel's control. "I'll be happy to explain to any judge why I moved my children away from a situation where their father valued control over their well-being." The lawyers spent another hour asking questions, taking notes, and making thinly veiled threats about legal action that could follow. But Elena could see their confidence wavering as they encountered not the desperate, powerless woman they'd expected, but someone who had clearly built a legitimate life for herself and her children. When they finally left, Elena collapsed onto the sofa, adrenaline leaving her shaky and exhausted. The children emerged from the playroom where they'd been remarkably quiet during the confrontation, Rex padding alongside them with protective alertness. "Are the bad men gone, Mama?" Sofia asked, climbing into Elena's lap. "They weren't bad men, baby. They were just doing their job. But yes, they're gone." Jake settled beside them, gathering Carlos and Diego against his sides with the natural affection that had developed over months of shared life. "What do you think, guys? Ready for some lunch?" The children accepted this return to normalcy with the resilience Elena never stopped marveling at, chattering about their morning adventures as if legal threats were just another part of adult life they didn't need to understand. That evening, after the children were asleep and Esperanza had produced another golden egg as if to celebrate their victory, Elena and Jake sat on the porch swing, wrapped in blankets against the November chill. "Do you think they'll come back?" Elena asked. "Maybe. But Elena, did you see how they looked at those employment documents? At the school reports and medical records? You're not vulnerable anymore. Miguel can't just swoop in and reclaim what he thinks belongs to him." Elena leaned against Jake's shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of his presence and the security it represented. "I couldn't have done this without you." "Yes, you could have. You just needed time to remember who you were underneath all the fear." They sat in comfortable silence, watching stars emerge in the vast Colorado sky. In the distance, cattle moved peacefully through moonlit pastures, and somewhere in the house behind them, 3 children slept soundly in beds they considered their own. "Jake," Elena said softly, "when you called me your partner today, I meant it, in every way that matters." Elena turned to face him, seeing love and commitment and unwavering support in his eyes. "I love you," she said, the words feeling like coming home and starting a journey simultaneously. "I love you too. All of you. This whole impossible magical family that landed in my barn and turned my quiet life upside down." Jake leaned down to kiss her, gentle and sure and full of promises for the future they would build together. When they separated, Elena saw tears on his cheeks that matched her own. "Will you marry me?" he asked, the question simple and inevitable and exactly right. "Yes," Elena whispered, then laughed with pure joy. "Yes, absolutely yes." From inside the house came the sound of small feet padding across hardwood floors, and Sofia's voice calling sleepily for her mama. Elena rose to tend to her daughter, but Jake caught her hand. "We're going to do this right," he said. "Legal adoption for the kids if they want it. A wedding that makes everything official. A life that no one can question or take away." Elena squeezed his hand, feeling the calluses that spoke of honest work and the strength that had sheltered them when they needed it most. "What about Esperanza's secret?" Jake grinned, his expression holding mischief and wonder in equal measure. "Well, every family needs a little magic, don't you think?" As Elena went inside to comfort Sofia, she heard Jake's quiet laughter following her, full of love and acceptance and the kind of joy that came from building something real together. Behind the house, in her comfortable coop, Esperanza settled her remarkable feathers and prepared to lay another golden egg, as if she understood that some miracles were meant to be shared with people worthy of protecting them. The wind moved through pine trees with sounds like whispered blessings, and Elena Martinez Morrison fell asleep that night surrounded by the family she'd chosen and the man who had chosen them all in return, dreaming of golden eggs and second chances and the kind of love that transformed ordinary lives into fairy tales that happened to be true. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.